The whisper cut through the headset as the lead boat drifted in the black seam between sea and rock. Ahead, high on the chalk-colored ridge, a red diode blinked once, then vanished. Not a warning light. A laser scatter. Some on the outpost had just swept the water. The Gulf looked empty from a distance. Up close, it was wired with eyes. The Iranian surveillance line sat on a broken necklace of coastal rock and concrete platforms overlooking a narrow shipping corridor where tankers, patrol craft, and signals traffic pressed through every night. The outposts were small, ugly structures, half bunker, half antenna farm, dug into the cliffs above the surf. But their value had nothing to do with size. They tracked emissions, mapped movement, and fed targeting quality data deeper inland. Blind them, and a stretch of the Gulf went dark. Leave them intact, and every vessel moving through that water did so under a hostile lens. That was why the Rangers were here. Not to hold ground, not to start a parade of flags and statements, just to hit fast, tear the network out by the root, seize whatever could be carried, and vanish before the coastline understood what had been taken from it. The force had staged offshore in silence. Weapons wiped down, suppressors checked, breaching charges wrapped against salt spray. One platoon split into assault and cut-off elements. A signals team carried compact exploitation kits for drives, radios, and encrypted modules. A combat controller rode the mission with an air window, so narrow it felt almost theoretical. Overhead support existed, but only as a last resort. This close to the coast, in this traffic, one wrong burst of noise would turn a raid into a regional incident before the boats even turned home. So they came low and wet instead. The coxswain killed the engine 50 meters from shore. The last approach happened by paddle, blades dipping into black water with almost no sound. Rangers stepped out into the surf, rifles high, boots striking rounded stones slick with salt. Above them, the cliff rose in jagged shelves. The climb lane had been chosen from imagery, but imagery never showed how rocks shifted under weight, or how the wind coming off the waterpress fabric against gear, or how every loose fragment sounded too loud when it skipped downslope. The point man froze halfway up. A shadow moved along the upper lip of the path. Not pacing, pausing. The team flattened into the stone. One ranger leaned into the cliff, watching through night vision as a lone sentry turned his head toward the sea, cigarette ember cupped low in one hand. He stood there for 3 seconds that felt much longer, then spit into the dark and moved on. The column climbed again. By the time they reached the first shelf, the outpost had formed. Sandbagged roof line. 2 dish arrays canted seaward. A camouflage mast with thermal optics nested beside a concrete equipment shed. Power lines ran from a generator revetment buried farther inland. Defensive geometry was simple but effective. One observation post facing the water, one trench cut toward the access road, one machine gun lane commanding the only easy approach. So the Rangers ignored the easy approach. The support element peeled off left, crawling into a fold in the rock overlooking the trench. The assault element stacked below the rear wall where the sea had undercut the cliff. Breaching tape went down across the charge. Hands touched shoulders. Final checks. No one talked now. Then the wall jumped inward. Concrete dust blew out in a hard gray pulse. 2 Rangers were through the opening before the rubble settled. Rifles searching across a narrow operations room lit by green screens and one swinging bare bulb. A man in headset gear reached for the desk. He dropped before his hand found what he wanted. Another came through a side doorway with a carbine halfway raised. He folded into the frame. The room compressed instantly into violence and angle and noise held tight inside concrete. Control secure. Outside, the support element opened a short, disciplined burst down the trench as 2 guards tried to pivot toward the breach. One fell against the sandbags. The other disappeared behind a retaining wall and started shouting into a radio. That changed everything. The second outpost, positioned 2 ridges east, had been expected to react late, if at all. Instead, a floodlight ignited across the black coast and cut a pale blade over the rocks. The beam snapped toward the first compound, then fixed on the shattered rear wall. A second later, the hillside above the Rangers cracked with incoming fire. Not heavy, accurate. The assault inside the bunker stalled for half a heartbeat. That was enough. One of the technicians, wounded but alive, slammed a dead man toggle mounted beneath the primary rack. Alarm screamed through the outpost. Data purge. The team leader crossed the room in 3 strides and drove the man away from the console, but 3 screens had already gone black. Solid-state modules began to burn themselves clean inside armored housings. Package what's left. Now, the signals team surged forward, ripping drives, cutting cables, yanking entire tray assemblies free and dumping them into padded sacks. Outside, the cutoff element shifted uphill to block the firing line from the eastern ridge. Grenades punched dirt and stone into the air. The machine gun in the trench woke up late, angry and blind, hammering the wrong angle. A ranger dropped to one knee, fired once, and the muzzle flash vanished. But the road was no longer quiet. Down beyond the ridgeline, engines were moving. Not many. Enough. The mission bent without breaking. One fire team stayed to finish the demolition sequence on the antenna farm and generator pit. Another dragged a compact jammer onto the roof and flooded the local band with electronic static, buying seconds where minutes no longer existed. The platoon sergeant gave the order to collapse the site in layers. Sensitive gear first, dishes second, power last. Suppression, not spectacle. Charges thumped through the compound. The first dish sheared off its mount and toppled into the rocks below. The second twisted, hung for a moment against the stars, then fell after it. The generator revetment blew outward in a burst of heat and gravel. Half the ridge went dark. Then the whole sector did. For a brief second, the gulf disappeared. Navigation lights blurred in the distance. Radar feeds cut. The outposts that had watched everything were reduced to smoke, fractured concrete, and 2 dead masts leaning over dead air. Extraction came under pressure. The Rangers moved downhill by a different route, faster and uglier, sliding the loose face of the cliff with prisoners of gravity and whatever rounds still chased them from the east. The boats surged in through rotor, wash, kicked down from supporting aircraft nobody onshore had seen until it was already overhead. Men and gear hit the decks hard. Engines roared. Bows turned seaward. Behind them, the coast burned in tight orange pockets. Ahead, the water opened black and wide. Only when the shoreline shrank did the intercepted traffic begin to make sense. One phrase kept repeating through the static, passed from station to station farther inland, urgent and incomplete. Not a call for reinforcements. A warning that another site had gone offline farther north, one that no one in the boats had touched. By dawn, the Gulf will be full of explanations. By nightfall, it will be full of hunting. And somewhere beyond the dark coast, another set of eyes had already gone blind before the Rangers ever came ashore.